The following Corvette ZR1 seminar was held at the Mid-America Funfest in Effingham, Illinois in 2011. It features speaker Dave McClellan, who was the engineering director of Corvette through 1992, and Art Spong, who was the product brand manager for Corvette through 2014.
One thing that I always recommend to Corvette drivers is that before they start tampering with their car too much for fun, go to a driving school. There's driving schools that use current generation Corvettes as training cars, and the trainers are professional race drivers themselves, so you get a very, very good training session leading you from the simple things that you need to know how to do and do well up to the very complex stuff. And that they have advanced schools, and you can go on and on, but the car really has so much capability beyond what most of us are capable of driving it to. It goes way beyond what's available to just drive around on the street. So you're morning, Fred. So if we can ever get this video going, we will do it, and it's that good. The ZR1, I've now seen one or maybe two of the original 1969-70 version ZR1s. The Z's in Chevrolet parlance are option packages. It's when you put things together as a group package, it's a Z package, and this historic package was put together around the small block, and there was also one put around the big block back in 1969-70 time frame, and those were the ZR1s and the ZR2s. So when we did the what became the ZR1 in 1990, we went back and used that historical package code, because it's always useful to have continuity within the Corvette family as to what's going on there. We were expecting, and this would have happened after I retired from Chevrolet, expecting to use ZR2 as a ultra high performance package code, and then somebody from the truck group put ZR2 as a package code on some stinking little pickup truck. That was the end of that. I don't know how that happens, Fred. This is Fred Galosh, by the way. Fred comes from the marketing side of Chevrolet, now retired. And
so, you want to do some art here yet?
I haven't seen.
Art's right here. Oh, there.
There. Yeah, that art. We're just going to talk about the history of the ZR1, and I have a video here that their system doesn't seem to know how to eat properly, but we'll get it. It may take another seminar to do it, but we will get it. So the real first generation ZR1, where we sold significant cars, was 1990, and I've written extensively about that in my book, so that you can go and really understand the details of what we did there. Engines today are all computer controlled, so when you see an engine that's putting out very high horsepower numbers, it turns out to be very special, and it also turns out to be something that's just absolutely dominated by sensors and the computers that manage the engine. When you go back to the old carbureted engine days, those engines were not well managed. And, I can remember on test trips out west where we would be running top speed on a Corvette, and you get to the end of the maybe an hour run, something like that, in the hot desert, and you'd have a hole in a piston, or there'd be some piece of mess that you had to deal with. So we always had a big support truck that followed along behind us to pick up the pieces. But that doesn't happen that much anymore. When you look at the engine that we did with the 1990 ZR1, that engine is well protected from drivers doing things that cause it to fail. It's not perfect, but it's real close, and that's also true of the current range of Corvette motors, all the way up through the new ZR1 supercharged motor. It's pretty hard to hurt those motors. I mean, I'm sure it can be done, but it's not easy. Yes.
I had a question, Dave. With the LT5, how much of the engine development was done by Lotus, and how much of an influence did Chevy have?
The question is how much of the development of the 1990 version LT5 was done by Chevrolet, by Lotus, by Mercury Marine, actually. The program was managed by Roy Midgley, who was the chief engineer for V8 engines in Chevrolet. And he had a very small staff working with him on this particular engine. He has a big staff working on all other V8 engines that were being used by Chevrolet, small blocks and big blocks. So basically Chevrolet's role was a management role. Lotus was responsible for design and development, and Mercury Marine, I would say after just the first generation of experimental engines, Mercury was up and running with enough of their production tooling that they were building the engines and then shipping them over to Lotus and Hethel for testing and running. So it was a very three-way kind of process, and back in those days before internet, why the fax machine was still the high-tech way of communicating between Lotus and Mercury Mercury and back to Lotus, and that's how that worked out. Another question. Fred, you got a question? No?
What's the system?
We got the hour. We got 45 minutes. Yeah, we're in good shape. Yes, way back here.
Where did the black engines come from?
Where did the black engines come from?
5, 7, or something like that?
But they were still basically the production engines. Yeah, they were painted special. We also did an engine, it never went to production, for the active suspension car. There was an active suspension ZR1 development program that went on in parallel with the program to develop the ZR1 itself, and we ultimately killed that program because it didn't make sense. And I write about that as well. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, so I just may be out of the purview of the seminar, but I was just curious about how the LS9, and I know it's as opposed to a normally aspirated engine like the LS7. The LS7 engine is a lot larger displacement, but does the stuff apply to that engine as well that you're referring to the LS9? As far as like the computer management?
Oh, absolutely, yes. The question is, does computer management apply to all engines? Whether it's the LT5 engine that was in the 1995 ZR1 or these current generation engines? And the answer is absolutely yes. And the computers in these cars engine computers are very large microprocessors. There's a whole bunch of information stored in there. We're going to have to hold for just a second here. Trains going by, Trump talking. You give me your question, I probably can overwhelm.
Yeah.
You getting it?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you were employed by Chevrolet and you were developing things, what was the practice?
Stick with it for a minute so we get it actually running. I don't see it yet. Oh, there. Yeah, it says play.
Play on.
And then you gotta select the ZR1. That's fine. Excuse me. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what's the process of going to GM management to get approval to spend money for these special projects?
Okay, good question. What does it take to get approval for special projects like a ZR1? Way back early in the C4 program, we built with the engine guys a number of turbocharged V8 small blocky cars. Okay, can you back that up to the beginning and pause it for just a second? Now, let me finish this, answering this question. Pardon?
We have to get it removed. We only have 2 buttons. So we're grabbing the remote.
Okay. Life's complicated. What does it take to get a program approved? Well, we started way back several years before doing some turbocharged Corvettes, probably around 600 horsepower, and they were, in their day, incredibly fast, aggressive cars. And we had our general manager, Lloyd Royce, out on the test trip with us, and he got to drive these cars. I think he enjoyed them immensely. He spun one of them out into the dirt, so he obviously knew how to go over his head. But it was Lloyd, as he moved up through the management chain, who became the sponsor of that program. And at his level, he wanted to make it happen. He wanted to do a Corvette that was naturally aspirated, not turbocharged. And who am I to argue with him if he's willing to go the mile with us? And his engine director gave him all the reasons why it couldn't be done. And Lloyd didn't accept that, and literally told Russ G, get on an airplane and fly, wherever you need to go around the world and find who is going to do these programs. He had 2 programs that he wanted to happen, and the Corvette was one of them. And so there was another program they put at Porsche in Weissach, because they have a big development capability there that they sell services with. And this program went to Lotus. They had just started a V8 program of their own, although they hadn't really brought it to fruition. And they had a team of guys available who had just come off doing a Formula One engine. That was a stillborn project as well, because the F1 changed the rules. They went from turbocharged engines to naturally aspirated engines. So this particular turbo program had gone through a single cylinder development phase, but had never gone multiple cylinder. And so they had the team of design and development engineers available to do our program. And so it was, in all ways, it was Lloyd who sponsored us and protected us so that we could get the job done. There's no way that you can just get this sort of stuff done in a big corporation like GM without that kind of sponsorship and unquestioned support.
So then my next question would be, who in the new GM system would be the person that would be driving it?
Yeah, who's there today driving these kind of programs? Well, for several years there, it was Bob Lutz. Now Lutz is retired, and I honestly can't tell you who. In fact, that's a good question to ask the current Corvette chief engineer, Taz Juchter. Who is the sponsor of the Corvette these days?
Dave, it's actually Mark, his son.
Think it's Mark? Okay. Yeah, Mark is now the president of the U.S. GM company. Mark Royce, son of Lloyd Royce. Now, what happened to our...
They started over.
Yeah, he had to go get another piece of equipment. I wish that, well, I mean, I hold my tongue, but they put all the parts here, but never checked out
It's
to
about
make them
30
work.
seconds, Dave. Maybe we just started it up. We can start 30 seconds later.
Yeah, we could do that. You got it there? Just see if you can punch a button.
It says press key.
There you go.
There we are. Okay. I'm going to intrude a little bit here. Just watch what's going on while I'm talking. On the track, you can see it right there. And they also code whether it's accelerating or braking. And here's this friction circle. Accelerating, braking, cornering to the right, cornering to the left. And the little green dots moving around there as he's driving the car. The car does go airborne a little bit through here. As you can see, it came over that rise and dropped rather sharp.
The factory tires.
It's a totally factory car. Yeah.
Running on cup tires. That's the new Michelin cup.
Yes, on the new Michelin tire.
This is a ZR1.
Yeah, that's the current ZR1. And there's sound for that too, someplace.
Well, you can hear it.
Okay, just turn it all the way up.
The same engineer that engineers tires for the race car. We are always looking for technology transfer. We go to the track on Sunday, and then we're engineering tires for the production car during the week. This Pilot Sport Cup represents the latest and most intense collaboration between the Michelin engineering team and the production cars team. Set up completely stock as it would be received by a real customer. We do have to add some safety equipment, which actually adds weight to the vehicle and actually slows us down a little bit. But the rest of the car is to production specifications, including alignment and trim height and everything that we normally expect out of a factory vehicle, up to and including the suspension parameters, including Michelin Pilot Sport Cup tires. At the Nürburgring, we're lucky enough to have Jim Merrill back as our test driver. He's our chassis development engineer at Team Corvette. Has been on the job for quite a long time. He drove the ZR1 3 years ago when we were there. The great thing about Jim is he's a super competent driver, super consistent, and the feedback we get can be applied to the car as it's driven on the street. So we're always trying to balance the capability on the track with comfort on and capability on the street. Jim's the perfect guy to do both those things.
Carousels. You were asking how many gears he's going through. He's probably going slow enough there to be in second gear, and then he's up in probably in sixth gear when he's up. The gear ratios on the ZR1s are quite a bit tighter than the standard car, so he's probably even in sixth gear when he's up at 183. this track is used by all car companies for testing these days. It's not used much for racing because it's too long and too fast, and you're airborne at least a couple of times going around there. And the modern race cars with all their downforce and speed really want to have a flatter track than this. Coming into the long straight. Said that it took about 100 laps for him to learn the track, so you can get some sense of this is not just joyriding around the track for the first time. He's been at this seriously for many laps.
Is he the same driver that drove the Cadillacs?
He has driven the Cadillacs, I think. Heinrichs also drives the Cadillacs. Yeah. This track was made famous by it was built back in the 20s and made famous in the mid to late 30s by the Silver Arrows, the Grand Prix cars from Mercedes and Auto Union, the front engine and the rear engine cars. There's been minor changes in the track since the 30s. Those cars, they would be lighter than the Corvette. They would have probably about the same horsepower as the Corvette. They were rated in the 600 horsepower range, but a little bit lighter. And of course, on the tires of those days and the brakes of those days, those cars typically were running somewhere in the 8.5 minute range to go, that long lap. This lap here was 7 minutes and 19 seconds. So you can see where technology has taken cars in terms of tires. Those race cars in the 30s might as well have been running on Space Saver spare tires. The rubber technology back then was nothing compared with what it is today. And they were running on German racing fuel, which was, I'm not sure that it was as bad as some of their rocket fuel, but it was incredibly corrosive stuff that they were producing back then. If you put your hand in it, you wouldn't have a hand. And there were probably 20 mechanics working at the car, and many more back in the test department, building parts to keep the cars running. When you look at what Neuro did here, there's probably one or two guys that are out there with him. Somebody had to run the camera. But basically, you just get in the car, put your helmet on, get in the car, push the button, start button, and go for a drive. It's not that complicated. I want to take a minute and introduce some folks here. Fred, why don't you stand up? Fred, you got a couple of talks coming up.
Sure.
Here, use the mic. And Art, you're going to give a talk?
Yep.
Yeah, come on up here. And Ralph and Jerry, come on up here. Just say hello, so the group can really get to know who the real seminar champions are.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Art Spong. I'm the current brand quality manager for the car. And basically, I am the interface between our dealers, our customers, engineering, and our assembly plants. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the current ZR1 is doing, how we got there. And then Fred?
Fred Galosh, I think you heard me some last year and such, and I did a lot with the end of C4 and the C5 and the Grand Sport and stuff, and I was there when Dave ZR1 hit the road, and I got to drive some of them and do all that stuff. Why don't we introduce the two other guys, and let Art talk about the new ZR1s.
Good morning. This is not a good place to be standing right in front of that speaker. I'm Ralph Kramer. Have had the good fortune to have been working on Chevy 100th Anniversary Chevy book for Automobile Quarterly for the last couple of years, along with this gentleman over here, who is...
I am Jerry Burton, and you might know me from having been the editor of Corvette Quarterly for the better part of 20 years, and also the author of the Zora Arcus Duntop biography. So anyway, I'm happy to be here. I haven't been at a Corvette event in a couple of years, so it's good to be back.
Thank you.
Ralph, are you going to do the 100-year-old man routine?
I can do that.
All right. Well,
I'm already there.
That's what it takes. All right, you want to tell about the new ZR1?
One of the things when we started to launch the ZR1, I get a lot of questions like, when did it start? Why did we decide to do it when we did it? It actually started before we launched the C6 car. When we were pitching to the executive management the new Z06, which was going to come out in 2006, you know, it was, let's see, Wagner was there, Dave Hill was pitching, Taz Jector, the chief engineer, was pitching, and we were basically asking the corporation to fund the car for us. We were looking for a price point about $60,000. We were looking for 500 horsepower, and so when the pitch was finished, we pretty much got the blessings to go forward with it. But Rick Wagner said, well, if this is $60,000, what would a $100,000 Corvette look like? And he just said it in passing. It wasn't a challenge. It was just said, you know, what would it happen? Well, Dave took that, gave it to one of our engineers, it was Ken Brown, and said, you know what, we ought to just come up with an answer. Because Rick, in the way he is, once he asks a question, you need to have an answer. So they went to work, working on what it would take, what a $100,000 Corvette would be like. So one of our objectives was the current Z06 was going to be about 198 miles an hour was top end. We knew that we wanted to be better than that, and it takes an incredible amount of horsepower to get that 2 miles an hour. You're just moving that much mass through the air. So they decided, okay, we need about 600 horsepower, but then we need to bring the weight down a little bit. So the team started to work on it. Well, if the Buff books were right, we were calling it the SS. That's when we didn't have a ZR1 name for it yet. Everybody knew when it came out we would probably call it the ZR1 based on the heritage, but we codenamed it the SS. Well, the Buff books started calling it the Blue Devil, and that was basically because that was Rick's alma mater. You know, he was from Duke, and so we actually played up to that. When we pitched the car to Rick and the rest of the executive staff, it was basically, this is the Blue Devil. And we pitched it at, if we spend $100,000, we figured we would build about 2 years worth of cars, because that was when the lifespan for the current C6 was due to end. So we figured 2 years at $100,000, we'd pay for all the tooling, pay for all of our engineering, and we'd have probably the ultimate car out there. Well, you know, bankruptcy comes along and the economy starts to stall, so it's actually gone longer than we actually anticipated. You know, we originally figured 2 years at $1,500 a year, and to be honest with you, we're going to build it until we quit building C6s. So, we look at taking some of the weight out of the car, you know, carbon fiber, the ceramic brakes that you see on the car. Have you ever seen one of our C6 or C5R cars at night with that glowing red mass behind the wheels? Well, that's what ceramic brakes will do for you. It also takes 11 pounds out of each corner of the car, and that's huge when it starts spinning out there on the outside edge. So Corvette had always wanted to do like a ceramic brakes, but we've never been able to fund it because they're very expensive. So when we got this $100,000 bogey, it was a good place to put the ceramic brakes. So that's why they're on the ZR1. We work with Brembo to design them. They are probably when we came out in 2009, the ZR1 was the largest single use in a production car of carbon ceramic brakes. We used more than a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, or anybody just because of the sheer volume. And we continue to use that volume up. Brembo in Italy cast the rotors for us. They're shipped over. We install them in a sub-assembly plant in North Carolina, and then they're shipped into the plant in just like a corner on a regular Z06. So they go in, and from here to, I'm guessing, to the building right there is probably about 100 feet. And with those brakes, you can take a ZR1 with those brakes, and you can stop from 60 to 0 in 100 feet. That's how effective the brakes are. I've had the opportunity to drive it on a couple tracks, not nearly like this, but at Road America, you come up into turn 1, it's an uphill start, and then there's a nice sweep to the right. The first time on my first lap, I went in the corner at about, probably 70 miles an hour, because the brake zones are way back here, because I'm used to driving a Z06. Well, by the end of the first session, I was going into that corner at 110, because I knew that brakes were, when I put the brakes on, they were going to stop me. So there's just an immense amount of confidence once you start driving the car. The car itself is designed for downforce, because one of the things that helps sets the car on the track is basically all the air flowing over top of it and keeping the air out from underneath it. So if you look at the front splitter on the ZR1, it sticks out about this far. It's carbon fiber. Well, it's carbon fiber for a couple reasons. First is weight, it takes out mass. The second is strength, because what happens when you hit about 80 miles an hour, the downforce on it starts to deflect and push it down. Well, on the regular ZR1 or the Z06s with the plastic splitters on them, they were deforming. So we had to go with something a little more stiff. So that's where the carbon fiber came from. We tried a couple with aluminum. They didn't work real well. So we stuck with the carbon fiber. Now, when we did that, the first time we ran the car, we found at about 90 miles an hour, that big gap in the fascia, where the air's supposed to go in. Well, there's so much downforce on it, it actually spread the fascia apart. So we had to go actually in and put a reinforcement on the inside of the fascia to support that itself. So when we look at our tires, we're running the Michelins on it. When we designed the car, we actually took Goodyear that we've used for years, and we said, you know what, we love your tires, but we want to see what better we can do. If we're going to run this car at 200 miles an hour, we want the best tire that we can get for our customers. So basically we gave Michelin and Goodyear our specs and said, this is what we want. And you guys go out and develop us a tire, and then we'll come back out and we'll actually drive it and have a shootout, and the best tire wins. So that's what happened. Is Michelin brought their tire in, Goodyear brought their tire in, and they took them out to Milford, which is our proving ground. And we had several of our drivers drive the car, and the Michelin was a clear winner. But not only for looks, we had to have the run flat tires, which was, Michelin was into it, but they really don't care that much about the run flats, because it really compromises the ride. So when we told them we wanted it had to have run flats, they had to go out and design this tire specifically for the Corvette. So we have, with the Michelins, a little better ride. They're a little stickier. They grip better in the rain, and they're a little quieter. So that's why the reason we put the Michelins on the car. When you see Merrill driving this one, this car has the cup tires on it, and they're basically a full-blown race tire. They're available on the ZR1. They're available on a Z06 with the Ultimate package. Basically, it's a racing slick. It does extremely well. We tell our owners, when you buy the car with those tires on it, you're limited. You shouldn't be driving it under 50 degrees, and you shouldn't drive it in any water, and especially standing water. When I drove one to Carlisle at the event and came back through the hurricane, so coming back on I-80, instead of doing my normal 75 miles an hour, I was a little skittish at about 55 or 60. So until I got to Pittsburgh and it dried up, I had to take it a little more carefully. So when you look at our carbon fiber rockers on the side, they're designed, again, to suck the car down. But when we started getting all this downforce, we actually got the nose a little heavy, so we had to change the spoiler on the back of the car. You'll notice the ZR1 is a little bit taller, and that's to give us a little more downforce to help balance the car. Yep. So, you know, one of our design criteria was we wanted to make sure that it was the ultimate track car, but at the same time we wanted to make sure that anybody that got in it could drive it. The car is very streetable. If you're a mild-mannered and you want to drive it around town, it's easy to drive. We went with a dual clutch setup. If you know our clutches on the rest of our cars, they're self-adjusting single disc. A ZR1 has a double disc. Basically, we wanted to get the same clutch pedal effort, but we wanted more grip when you're putting that kind of torque out there. So, questions on the new ZR1? Brett?
Has it really changed that much since '09?
Yeah, in '09, you know, we came out with the base car. In '10, we came out with launch control, and we came out with active suspension. You know, we have the MR, the magnetic ride suspension. Well, it's not been used on a high-performance car, basically because of the heat it generates. When the car is bouncing around at track speeds, it tends to generate a lot of fluid heat and buildup in it. So until we could get a shock that was compatible with the heat, we had a real difficult time putting it on the car. Well, with the ZR1, we were able to do that. And now with our new suspension system, you can actually tailor how you drive to the car. You can set our suspension settings on 1 through 5, and basically, much like launch control, are there any 2010 manual transmission owners here? 2010, all our manual transmissions have launch control. And basically that is, you put the car in first gear, you have the wheels pointed straight ahead, you turn traction control off, and you mash the pedal to the floor. Normally, you'd get up to about 7,000 RPM on a Z06, and it would hit the red line. On a ZR1, you'd be at about 6,800 to hit the red line. Well, with launch control, it doesn't do that. It goes to about 4,000 and stops, and it just stays there. And then you just take your foot off the clutch quickly, and it manages both body, roll, sway, fishtailing. It also manages our traction control, so you get the best launch. So what we did with our suspension system, yeah, anybody can drive it quickly. So with our suspension system, we took it one step further. So the average track driver that has some experience, you probably set it on track setting 3. And what that allows you to do is when you're coming out of the turn, rather than feather the gas like you saw Jim Merrow do, trying to keep the traction down, you just mash the pedal to the floor, and the car takes care of how much throttle to apply, how much traction to apply. So you come out of a corner like a pro. All you have to do is concentrate on your line, as opposed to wondering out how much modulation on my clutch, where's my throttle at. So if you're an expert driver, you can put it on level 5, and that pretty much turns everything off. If you're in the rain, you turn it down to 1. And it lets you basically come out of a corner still, your foot firmly planted on the floor, but will modulate the throttle. If we start to see wheel slip, we back off some torque on it. So that's one of the changes that we've seen from 2009 to 2010 and 11. So the gentleman asked about earlier about how much electronics do we have on the car. We have more computers in a current car than there was actually used in the first space launch. We monitor air temperature, air mass flow coming through. We monitor the burned exhausts. So we can pretty much tell you at any point what the engine is doing, what the suspension is doing, what the brakes are doing. You know, and now we monitor what your interior climate is. So if you just set your AC on 68 and leave it there. So, other questions?
What are we looking for in power plants in the next series?
What are we looking for power plants in the next series? It's, you know, we never talk about the next year's products, but I'll tell you, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, 6 cylinders and turbochargers, and the feeling in the Corvette community is we will never have a 6-cylinder. Taj is extremely vocal about, you know, we're going to have a V8, we're not going to go backwards in power, so whatever we come out next is going to be equal to or better than this one.
So when they fire Taj, you'll know what's coming.
That's right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How much is a brake rotor on a ZR1?
How much is a brake rotor on a ZR1?
If you could buy it over the counter, what would you pay?
You can buy it over the counter. In fact, if you go out and you're one of our guys that track these cars, the normal driver will never replace one. The average driver, both pads and rotors will last you the life of the car. But if you're one of these guys that, like myself, that goes out on the weekends every now and then just kind of beats it up to see what it'll do, it's about $2,500 for the rotor and $500 for a pad.
$3,000.
That's a corner. So you put 25 here, 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 and there. 500 for the front pads, 500 for the rear pads.
$12,000.
Put in an advertisement here. It also has SKS racing hubs on all four corners. And those are available for your C5s and your C6s for those that don't have it. And for a normal driver, you will not replace those hubs ever. We have Danny Kellemeyer, a big racer in Detroit, who put 4,500 race miles and did not want to take them off the car. These are actual track miles on the racing. And we made him take them off so we could do measurements. But so those hubs are good stuff.
For me, this was a very great story that's being told here this morning, because it tells another story, which is what's the relationship of a ZR1 to General Motors, to Chevrolet. And it can be a very healthy relationship, because here you've got what is truly an ultimate road car that has capabilities that are everything that the engineer can possibly put into the car, given the state of technology today. And in the best of worlds, this will translate into other cars that General Motors does. It will act as an umbrella and give the broader engineering team a sense of where they can go and what they can accomplish down within the car program. Certainly the Cadillac CTS has taken on a lot of these same qualities pretty directly. And not being inside GM for quite a while, I really don't know what's going on there myself. Maybe Art, you want to talk a little bit about we got probably another 5 minutes here about how these kinds of cars cascade into the rest of the product line, if they do. Yeah, there's no guarantee. You can still have crummy little cars.
Yeah, and we call it technology transfer. It's what we learn from a ZR1 on the track or a session, and then we can move it down into our product line. Like ceramic brakes are very expensive, but if we build enough cars and trucks with them, it brings the cost down for everybody. So basically you take something that you're only making 1,000 of a year and you spread that across several product lines. Well, now you're getting to 5,000 and 6,000, so it brings the price point down for everybody. When you look at the ZR1, what we learned, the ground effects on the ZR1 that we've moved down to the Z06 now. Basically, we learned it. We figured out how much it required to keep the car stable. And then, the next best thing is let's put it down on a Z06. And now you're starting to see it come down to a Grand Sport. Other technology transfer, you look at the MR shocks that we tuned for the ZR1 are now available on the Z06. And you'll eventually see them on a Grand Sport. So basically, what we build here, what we test here, we work out most of the bugs. I mean, we looked at supercharging. I mean, as Dave said earlier, we talked, our first ZR1 when we had it on the track was a turbocharged car that we were testing. We basically bought a bunch of components from the aftermarket, stuck it on it, and that was our first mule, we call them. And it made, I think, 2 laps out at Milford, and the driver noticed the smoke, pulled over to the side of the road, and the car went up in flames. Basically, that's what we figured, that turbocharging did not belong on a supercar. So that's why we went with superchargers, and that's where the Cadillac CTS-V came up with their supercharger rather than a turbocharger.
Did you want to say something, Fred?
Just going to talk about the technology transfer is part of it, but to Art's comment, in my mind, the real key is the financing. And a good example is, you'll all know that when C5 came out, they started a whole new series of engines, the LS engines, which are everywhere now. The only way we got that engine was because we built a new engine for the truck programs. Theirs was going to be steel, ours was going to be aluminum, and the truck program basically paid for the Corvette's new motor. So that's how you need the volume, and if you get the volume, then you can transfer it across everything. So now everybody's using LS.
When we started the LT5 engine program, the Chevrolet V8 engine design development team was so busy doing what they were doing, just calibrating old engines and meeting emissions and fuel economy regulations, that they wouldn't touch doing a program like this. So we get it underway, and then they come back to us and say, well, how come you didn't ask us to do that? We could have done that. And the answer was they were sitting there fat, dumb, and happy at about 250 horsepower with the Corvette motors of the 1985, 6, 7 time frame. And we couldn't get them to move. And finally, with the ZR1 program, it was like a hot poker up there, you know what, and they started to move, and they learned how to do 400 horsepower, and as you can see with the naturally aspirated engines today, they learned to bore them out even further, and to get up to 500 horsepower, and it's been a marvelous progression, but it looking back on it, it took are doing the LT5 ZR1 program outside of their area to get them to move. They just wouldn't have moved otherwise. So, yeah, these programs have value that goes well beyond the individual car, and you know what it accomplishes for Chevrolet and for you guys, the owners. The gentleman in front here asked, you know, when he should buy his next Corvette. Should he wait for a C7 or should he buy one of these ZR1s today? And my recommendation would be buy it today while you know it's available, and before the government mandates around 50 mile per gallon fuel economy and all this kind of stuff really make it harder and harder to do special cars like this and sell them to customers in the U.S. So life's too short. Enjoy it now. Don't wait on the if come that something might be better later on. Any more questions for any of us? Yeah.
Watching that video, I never saw that driver go over 190 miles an hour. Okay. In fact, he never did reach 190.
No, low 180s, 183, I think. Yeah.
My point is this: that's 638 horse. There's a black Cadillac over here that's 771 horse with a special design. Okay. My point is, if you can't do 200 on that track, then what does 771 really mean? I mean, more horsepower doesn't necessarily increase the speed around the track. So where's the dividing line or the point of no return with horsepower?
That's kind of why we went to traction control, because I can give you 800 horsepower, and it really creates a nice big cloud of smoke when you go to launch. So, with the traction control and launch control, the question basically is, why do we need 600 horsepower and where do we stop? And in all honesty, it's, you know, I can give you 505 in a Z06 and you can go out and melt the tires. And you got 638 in a ZR1 and you can melt those tires, they're just more expensive.
Well, that's at the bottom end too. When you get up to speed, it all changes.
Yep, and being able to keep the car firmly planted on the surface is the most important time of making this time. I mean, you'll see Jim bobble a couple turns coming out and he's a little loose. You know, that's a 1/10 of a second. You know, and it's not so much that he can hit 180 or 190 on the straightaways. He's got to make it through the corners, and that's what's so great about the Corvette is it handles better than most any other car out there. I mean, and for the money, you won't find anything that handles the way it handles. I mean, there's over 117 turns on that track. There are some nice straightaways, but he makes his time and he makes the car dance the way we want to, because it can go into a corner, and the 600 horsepower is basically gives you the torque to pull it in whatever gear he's in. So if he's in second gear or third gear, or some of the corners he comes out at fourth gear, he has 600 foot-pounds of torque that gets all that transferred to the ground.
I have a tutorial on horsepower in my book, and basically what it's all about is, if you think of a graph, horsepower, road speed, the horsepower that you can put on through the tires onto the road basically increases linearly with speed. And so at low speed, you can't put much horsepower on the ground. You just spin the tires. But as you go faster and faster, somewhere, I don't remember the numbers, but let's say at 100 mile an hour, you can come close to absorbing 800 to 1,000 horsepower before you've got wheel spin. So at the low end, you really can make the case for all-wheel drive if you want to go at ultimate longitudinal acceleration rates. At higher speeds, the value of all-wheel drive disappears on you, because you don't have enough horsepower to deal with it. The small block, not in terms of locomotive horsepower, but in terms of supercharged or turbocharged horsepower, there are guys running around that have built 1,000 horsepower small blocks. So it's not that it's expensive to do. It's not that easy to do, but it's doable. And those are very interesting cars in and of themselves. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for your attention.